Autism and social capital. Do you have social capital? Is that a term you've heard before? You're going to need it for things like dating, making friends, getting a job, professional networking, all that kind of stuff. So at the very least, it helps to know what it is and how it works. Hi everyone, Paul Micallef here from Autism from the Inside. I make weekly videos sharing the human side of autism, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. So as many of you know, I have a special interest in emotional intelligence, and I'm even writing a book about it at the moment to share some of what I've learned about that in my journey. So this video today is a little bit of a self-indulgence where I'm going to share some of my special interest with you. I've recently discovered this concept of social capital, and I think it's incredibly useful for understanding a whole range of social dynamics. So bear with me, and hopefully by the end, you'll agree that this is a really useful concept. So firstly, what is social capital? So if we think of capital in the traditional financial sense, the things that you have, like money, assets, nice cars, fancy clothes, that kind of thing. So physical resources like that could be considered your financial capital. So in a similar way, your social capital includes your social assets, things like relationships, knowledge, experience, networks, connections, things like that. If you want to get by in the physical world, you're going to need physical financial assets. And if you're going to get by and do well in the social world, you're going to need some social assets or social capital. So let me give you a really quick example of how social capital is very different to financial capital. Imagine there's a guy sitting on a park bench with a backpack. He's looking a little bit shabby, probably hasn't had a shower in a day or two, and it looks like he doesn't have a home to go to. Everything he owns is in that backpack. Now, socially, there's a really big difference between a local homeless person with everything they own in a backpack and with nowhere to live, compared to an international traveler with everything they own in the backpack and nowhere to live. Even if they both currently have no money, the traveler has more social capital. In a sense, we don't really know how wealthy people are in everyday life. If I meet someone on the street, I have no way of knowing if they're just barely making ends meet and paying the bills at the end of the week, or if they own an investment property portfolio. Instead, there's this other factor that's even more important in terms of how people treat you. I'll give you another example. When I was at university, I did a student exchange program and went to live in Malaysia for 6 months. And while I was there, basically everyone I talked to either wanted to go to Australia, planned to go to Australia, just got back from going to Australia, or had a friend who recently went to Australia. And so that fact automatically gave me a huge amount of social capital. People wanted to talk to me. People were deliberately being nice to me because they wanted to engage with me. I was instantly cool without necessarily being cool, instantly desirable and attractive in a certain sense, simply because of my social capital. And having done a reasonable amount of travel in my time, I can attest to the fact that simply by virtue of the fact of growing up in Australia and speaking English, I automatically have a significant degree of social capital no matter where I go in the world. It's a combination of my knowledge and experience and connections, or at the very least, my perceived knowledge and experience and connections. People think, oh, you're from Australia. That's a long way from here. You must be interesting. I'd like to talk to you. And until I give them evidence to the contrary, I'm already in their good books. Now, here's the thing about social capital. There's a little bit of an exchange rate. So all of those things were true when I was traveling, but when I come back to my own hometown, suddenly being from Australia doesn't give me any social capital at all, or at least not as much as it did overseas. Instead, when I'm talking to my friends and they all know lots about football and I know nothing about football, suddenly my social capital has gone down significantly because in that situation, I don't have the kind of knowledge and experience and connections that make me a valuable, interesting person to talk to in that situation. If I'm unemployed on government benefits and I sit at home and play video games all day, when I go out and try and talk to people, there's just a limited amount of stuff that I can tell them about my life that's going to be interesting. Compare that to I have a job, or I have an interesting hobby, or I'm good at this particular sport, or I've had these other kinds of experiences, then when I go out and talk to someone, I've got interesting things to say that they're going to want to actually listen to. So even though in an objective sense, I have a huge amount of social capital due to my passport, language, and culture, it's still possible to have a comparatively low social standing in a particular environment. And here's the flip side to social capital. If you have it, you're going to be attractive and people are going to want to talk to you. And when you don't have it, the opposite is true. People with low social capital are undesirable in a sense, and people actively avoid interacting with them. It's like being in high school and being made fun of because you were nice to the weird kid. Socially, social capital rubs off on people around you, which means if you have a lot, people are going to want to spend time with you and want to get some of that for themselves. And if you're seen as undesirable for any reason, then people actively avoid you lest your comparatively low social status rub off on them and they get a bad reputation. So that's all very interesting, but what can we actually do with this information? Well, just like financial capital, there are ways to deliberately increase your resources. If I want to earn money, I need to go out and find a job. If I want to increase my social capital, I need to go out and do interesting things that are actually valuable to society. It's the difference between my hobby is playing video games versus my hobby is studying cybersecurity. These things have different perceived value in society. And just like financial resources, you can give someone social capital. If I go and sit down next to a homeless person on the street and have a chat with them, the people walking by are going to be much more likely to look at that person with a slightly more positive regard compared to if they were just sitting by themselves. In a professional networking sense, if I've met someone who's desirable and other people want to get to know that person, then just by the fact that I'm a vague acquaintance of this person, suddenly that's increased my own social capital. Another way to increase your social capital is by learning about important things. This is why a lot of aid organizations, they don't just provide food, water, and shelter, they provide education as well. Knowledge about the world, knowledge about how it works, especially knowledge about society and culture and language. These are all sources of social capital. That's one of the reasons that I'm personally so privileged with any country that I go to visit. If that country doesn't speak English, then just by virtue of the fact that I know how to speak English, suddenly I have something to offer them that is very valuable, even if it's just a conversation. I was traveling through Poland once and I got recruited by this company to go and live for free at this fancy hotel in the mountains for a week. Free accommodation, free food, free everything, in return for having a chat in English with these really high-flying business people who wanted to improve their English. I wasn't teaching them language. Most of them were already reasonably fluent. I was mostly just giving them an opportunity to practice. And for me, we're just going for a walk in the mountains and having a chat. But from a social capital perspective, I was providing a valuable service. One more example before I wrap up that will hopefully give you a bit more of a sense of what I'm trying to describe with this term social capital. On my travels, I met a woman in Belgium who went solo traveling in China with her 6-week-old baby. And at first, you might think, wow, you're traveling by yourself with like a 6-week-old baby? Wow, that sounds really tough. And she said, actually, it was a lot easier than traveling without a baby. Why? Social capital. People are nice to you when you have a newborn baby that you're carrying everywhere. And that is the core point that I'm sort of trying to drill home here, is that social capital is the thing that causes people to be nice to you or to avoid you. There are obviously a lot of exceptions, but as a general rule, I can expect a stranger to treat me according to my perceived social capital, which means there are things that I can do to deliberately make sure I give a good impression. Things like how I dress, how I speak, what story I tell about myself. Recognizing that social capital exists and is so influential means that I can deliberately work with it and also acknowledge the times where it absolutely does not work to my advantage. For example, maybe in your culture, people stereotype you and make uncharitable assumptions about you just because of how you look. In my opinion, recognizing that that happens is the first step to actually doing something about it. Anyway, I should probably leave it there. I don't know how long this has been already. It's always a little bit of a dangerous thing to do a video on a topic that is very close to my special interest. If you've made it this far and you're interested to hear even more about how emotions work and how to manage things socially, you can check out the Autism from the Inside website to get updates about my upcoming book. As usual, I'd love it if you left a comment and let me know your thoughts on this video. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this topic, and I will see you again next week.